Hi, folks. Welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Today, I want to talk to you more in depth about a subject that I have mentioned several times over the last few weeks in numerous videos. But today, I want to take a little deeper dive into it because I believe that this is a very critical issue that so many people aren't looking at when it comes to food production here in the United States and globally. We're hearing all these stories about, Ukrainian wheat and Russian wheat and the sunflower seed oil over there and all these different problems with fertilizer, global fertilizer markets and everything, and how it could cause, food shortages and supply chain problems and famines and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And all that's real and all that's important. But there's a problem here in the United States because most Americans keep falling back to, well, that's really bad for those people, but good thing we live in America and we produce lots of food and we're going to be just fine here. We've heard that more times than we probably want to hear from our friends and families and even a few people on the internet about how not to worry about it. America is a huge producer of food, and we're going to do just fine. So, it's too bad for the rest of the world, but we'll be fine. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true because there's a thing going on here in the United States that if it was the only thing going on, it would be worthy of being concerned, and it would be a serious thing. But it's not the only thing going on. It's going on with all these other things, and we need to be aware of it. And I'm talking about the drought. Our drought conditions here in the United States are worse than it's ever been recorded, okay? And they believe, going back through how they do with science and history, at least 1,200 years since we've had a drought this bad. And other places say, you'd have to go back at least to the 1500s to try to find something similar to this. We're talking mega serious droughts to the point that food is not being produced in the way that it should be or could be. Animals are being culled. Farmers aren't planting at all. Some are only planting some. Farmers can't get loans to plant. A lot of farmers, they have to go out every year and get a short-term loan so that they can, have the money, the liquidity to buy the seed and the fertilizer and everything. And a lot of farmers aren't getting those loans because these banks are only loaning to farmers that can guarantee that they have a good water source. This is becoming a very serious problem, folks. And I have a stack of papers here of stuff that I want to run through with you because we need to be aware of this and quit just this, well, it's going to be bad for those other countries, them third world countries. There might be starving and having famine. Here in America, we might have a few higher prices, but we'll do just fine. We don't know that we'll do fine. The way things look right now, we're going to be barely getting by. And if anything happens whatsoever that exacerbates the situation, we could find ourselves closer to a situation like Europe and Africa in the Middle East if we don't start stocking up now, at least for some of you. This is just happening everywhere. I mean, the whole planet is tightening down on their food supplies. There's been over a dozen countries so far that have either outlawed, banned, or restricted exports of certain foods. So the food that is moving around has not just been held back because of the war, and exports out of Ukraine and maybe Moldova and Belarus and Russia, but a lot of other countries are jumping on board because they see that this is becoming a problem, and so they're holding on to the food that they have. They figure it's better to take an economic hit now than to experience starvation later. America isn't doing that. Time Magazine ran this article here. And this is just my little conspiracy theory mind. But Time Magazine's one of those magazines that seems to be kind of letting us know what's getting ready to happen. And many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so here it's talking about that this Ukrainian food crisis, folks, it's just a preview of what's to come. Okay, so just buckle up and get ready. Kind of like the CEO of BlackRock, the big, $10 trillion, holding company. He said, buckle up because it's going to get bad. And through all of this, through all of the food shortages, the wheat and all that kind of stuff because of the war, everyone keeps looking to three countries to make up for it. And those three countries is Canada, India, and the United States, because we're all three big producers. And so everyone's looking to those three countries as to kind of save the world. You know, Russia and Ukraine and the Black Sea area, that's the breadbasket of the world, and they're not able to put out like what they've normally. So these other three countries are going to up their production, and we're going to save the planet, right? Except guess what? Those three countries have a lot of problems of their own. Last year was the worst year on record for Canada and their farming regions, and they're expecting this year to be another really bad a bad drought year. And the thing is that Canada is a big country, and they're split between in areas that are not getting enough rain to the areas that are getting too much rain. And it's there's not a balance there, and that's the same story here in the United States a lot. The canola is a big crop in Canada, and we're already dealing with the cooking oil shortage. You know, with Ukraine producing almost 50% of the world's sunflower seed oil, and then now Canada, they're the biggest canola oil producer, and they're having to cut the amount of that they're growing 7 to 10%. So we're going to see, and then what was it? Was it Indonesia or one of those countries that cut their exports of palm oil? So we're going to see the oil that's just going to continue to worsen. You know, less oil out there, and of course, oil is used in a lot of stuff. You know, it's not just the oil that you buy in a bottle. It's used in all, you know, nearly all food products have some kind of oil in it, and so we're going to see that worsen. And then in India. Many of you know this, but India is experiencing a massive, massive heat wave. I mean, they're experiencing temperatures of like 50 degrees Celsius, which, if my American math is right, that's like 120 to 130 degrees that in some areas that they are experiencing. It is absolutely devastating. It's causing them to go through shortages of energy because people are trying to keep their places cool so it's tolerable. People are dying, literally dying in the streets in some places because it is so hot, and it's also threatening their farming. You know, they're a big farming nation also, and it's absolutely destroying their farming. It's killing wheat that's standing in the fields because it's way too hot. There's farm animals that are dying. You know, they're falling over dead in India because of that kind of heat. Can you imagine that kind of heat? 120 degrees to 125 degrees or higher. And they're not nearly as developed, so they don't have the resources that we would here in America to kind of help us deal with that kind of heat wave. It's absolutely devastating. And so there's 2 out of the 3 countries that was going to save the world, right, when it comes to food. Well, what about America? Well, America, like I said, we're dealing with a 1,200-year drought. And the spring outlook for this year looks actually worse than last year. And every year for the last few years, they keep saying, this is the worst one. This was worse than last year. Well, the spring outlook looks like it's going to expand, that the drought's going to get worse, and it's going to expand into new areas. They're talking about prolonged droughts out west, southern plains. They're actually becoming quite concerned for the 2022 growing season, to the point that there's a lot of talk online about them actually calling herds. That there's a lot of beef farmers that are starting already to do it on their own. They're slaughtering a lot of cattle because there's not enough water to keep them alive. There's not enough water to grow the food that they need. Hay prices are expected to be really high in a lot of places this year because of the lack of fertilizer and the drought. A lot of these big hay producers, if you know, that they use fertilizer to grow it, and then of course they need water. And there's 2 things that's in short supply. And so this drought here in the U.S. it's going to continue to make things worse. And the point that I'm trying to get at today is, if everything was normal, if everything in the world right now was pretty normal, if we didn't have fertilizer shortages and increase in prices of fertilizer, if we didn't have increased prices, the highest prices ever for fuel, if we didn't have a shortage of diesel fluid, exhaust fluid, if we didn't have supply chain problems, if we didn't have a war going on, if we didn't have general inflation where everything is just higher, if we didn't have the difficulty for farmers to get all the stuff that they need, the shortages in the manufacturing, when it comes to like cans, the aluminum shortages and paper shortage, all these problems, all these little problems all over that are affecting food, okay? Because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of little problems. Some of them are really big, some of them are small, this mysterious burning of all these manufacturing plants. There was another one yesterday that caught fire and burned. If we didn't have all of these problems going on, and it was a pretty normal year, other than this drought alone would be something to be really, really concerned with, because it's epically big. It's so widespread, and it's so extreme in some areas, so that if this was the only thing we had to worry about, the drought alone would be very concerning, and we should really prepare for SHTF if that was the only thing going on. But as we all know, that's not the only thing going on. It's just one piece of a huge puzzle that's going on. And this may be a really big piece, but the fact is it's only one piece of many things that are happening. So the many times over the past weeks and months, I have used the phrase that this is a perfect storm brewing. That's exactly what I mean. It is an absolute perfect storm. There are so many factors going on that affects food supplies, supply chain, energy, all those things going on all at the same time. I cannot imagine there not being some really major problems. Will it be to the point that people in America is going to be starving and looking like, 1980s and 90s Ethiopia? Probably not. I mean, there is a possibility it could get to that bad, but probably not. But it will be bad, okay? And even if you're just stocking up now because the price of sugar is going to be 3 times higher than it is now, or flour, or something like that, if you're only prepping right now just to save some money because you don't want to pay the ridiculous high prices we're going to pay within the next year or two, that alone is worth it. But there's a strong possibility that things could just spiral out of control because it's so bad. When things get this bad, it doesn't take much of a piece of straw to cause it to just go over the cliff. And there's a couple of articles here that I want to read to you to kind of show you. And these are recent articles. This one here is in Progressive Farmer. And in the article, they're interviewing this guy, Mike Lass. He's a farmer in West Texas, out in the Panhandle in Texas. And he says it's dry, dry, dry. Says that his area has faced some of the deepest drought conditions and missed most of the recent rains. He says the dry land wheat in his area is completely gone. It doesn't exist. We're going to have some moisture pretty quick, or folks are going to have to start culling cow herds, maybe even liquidating them. In eastern Nebraska, a long winter with little to no snow cover has left Kenny Reinke with one of the toughest wheat stands I have ever seen, he says. In central Kansas, Adam Baldwin said that a recent inch of rain in his field saw the first measurable moisture since last fall. So since last fall, and this article was just a few days ago, he had the first measurable moisture, and it was a boost to the winter wheat, and will likely keep some farmers committed to planting corn, but they need more rain now. This other article here's from Forbes. I'll read more of it because there's just a lot going on in this article. Third generation farmer from San Joaquin Valley, Gary Bean, will only be planting half of his 1,200 acres this year. He doesn't have enough water for the other half. Remember, I was saying the farmers aren't planting it if they don't have enough water, and the banks aren't loaning anything to these farmers if they can't guarantee that they have enough water. We're working on survival more than anything else and getting through this year, he says, who farms tomatoes, almonds, cotton, garlic with his sons and grandsons on the land his grandfather settled in California in the 1930s. It's pretty discouraging. I'm hoping to steer my grandchildren away from agriculture. It's sad, he says. California is having its driest year ever. In West Texas, no one alive has seen this little rain. The vast underground lake that feeds the Great Plains, which helps produce 1/6 of the world's grain, is shrinking. And there's, if you get into this, there's many of you know, some of you don't, of this vast underground a lake basically that the whole Midwest. That's why it's such a big breadbasket there. All the plains out there. You look around and there's not a lot of lakes and waterways. It's because it's all underground, and that has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. It couldn't come at a worse time. Food prices are already stratospheric. Wheat prices worsened by a shortage due to the Russia war in Ukraine have spiked. Soybeans are the highest in 10 years. Avocados haven't been this expensive since the 90s. Corn prices are flirting with an all-time record. America's drought will push them and others higher. Consumers will see high prices and fewer choices or imported replacements, said Mike Wade, executive director for the Pro-Agricultural California Farm Water Coalition. Despite elevated prices, farmers from tomato growers to dairy operators have been persuaded by drought to get out of the business. So, all these high prices, the farmers could make bank on it, but they're not doing it because there's no water, okay? The first decision point is whether or not they have water. Many farmers are getting a zero allocation this year. They're making decisions on whether they can find water to pump. Wade's organization estimates that farmers will continue a trend of taking more California farmland out of production this year, and the drought will cause more than a $3 billion in negative economic impact this year. Folks, this drought is serious. No one's really talking about it. Everyone's focused on the war in Ukraine and the wheat there and how it's going to affect the rest of the world. And it is. It's going to drastically affect the rest of the world. There's places in the Middle East, in Africa, that highly depend, that are getting 80, 90, even 100% of their wheat supply and their grains from Ukraine. It's going to affect them bad. But we can't just sit around and think that we're going to be fine here in America because we produce so much food, because we're not producing that much food anymore. We used to produce a lot of food, but we've been producing less and less and less. And this year, we're probably going to produce less than we ever have in some areas because of this drought, and then also the many other things going on. Folks, you've got to start stocking up. And not only you need to be stocking up, you need to be growing your own food, and you need to be, as much as you possibly can, securing water sources for you and your crops. Digging a well, building a cistern, digging a pond, putting up rainwater collection, buying a swimming pool and put it in your backyard. Whatever you need to do to secure your water, I suggest you do it, because as all these are saying, it's expanding, and maybe it's not in your area right now, but in the next 2 to 5 years, could it be? Very possibly. Folks, get your houses in order. Prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.